We have several items to discuss tonight. First of all, we're going to, Jack's going to give us a staff report relative to the fiscal year 17 budget summary. So we've done there.
Okay.
And then we'll at that point proceed from there.
The quick 2 cents of it is, I'm going to give it to Dan to give you, but Dan has prepared the kind of the overview of last year. Today, we finished with all the bank reconciliations for the entire fiscal year. They are all signed and done.
For the record, they were done on last Thursday when I prepared this. They just weren't signed off on it.
Right, yeah. Because I didn't know I needed to sign off. New thing for me, signing off on bank reconciliations. So we went through that today. Took about 40 minutes total to go through and make sure we had the reconciliations. Dan is preparing for the audit that's coming up here shortly. They're arriving soon.
The week of January 8th. They'll be
So
here.
that process will start for 2017 that this represents here shortly. So what I will do to expedite this is I'll shut up and let Dan do it. So Dan, if you'll run them through what you have here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I provided to you guys in your packet kind of a very brief, in summary, here's how we ended up fiscal year 2017. Kind of wanted to take a few minutes and maybe go through this fund by fund if you guys are okay with that. Specifically the general fund, there are a couple of things I want to point out. So we began the year with just under $4.5 million in a cash balance. Our actual revenue we received over the year was just a touch over $4.4 million. The biggest thing that probably should jump out is I included there the revenue budget and the difference between our budget and our actual. We were $175,000 under what we budgeted as revenue. As we talked about the fiscal year 2018 budget, one of the things I preached and I included in the document was that we always budget revenues conservatively. So if anything, we should always be over budget on revenue. How the heck did we end up $175,000 under budget? Pretty simple explanation. Actually, you'll see that completely flip-flops. In that $4.5 million of revenue budgeted revenue, that included $1 million in bond revenue for the reconfiguration of this building. We didn't do that at all. So the true revenue budget is $1 million less than that. So $3.6 million. So once you take that into consideration, we're really about $800,000 in the positive for that. So we budgeted getting $1 million. We received zero of that $1 million because we didn't issue the bonds. So we're actually about $800,000 in the positive. Now that seems really high. Why did we budget so low if we're ending the year $800,000 over budget? Well, a couple big things is we sold the road and got $272,000, or we took on the responsibilities of the road, got $272,000 from the county. We had an insurance settlement where we got $160,000 for some hail damage. For reference, our building permits are $115,000 over what we budgeted. We thought we were going to get. So when you add all that stuff together, we're really only about $220,000, maybe more than our budget. Okay.
Question. Should we be putting in the budget like this $1 million in the bond when we really don't know if that's going to happen? Is that normal practice to
I
do
don't
that?
think so.
Okay.
For example, this next year coming up, we're talking about doing this big $9 million. I budgeted for the first $300,000 payment on those bonds. That's what we're actually going to see as an expenditure. We're not going to get $9 million in and then pay $9 million out in projects. I don't know why it was budgeted like that for this year, but that's how I've done it going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
As we run a little further down the general fund, I do need to point out, and I want to point out that likewise, that $4.9 million of budget, it looks like we came in $61,000 under budget in the expenses. But that $4.9 million of expenditures budget also includes $1 million for reconfiguring this building, which we did not do.
In revenue.
Mm-hmm. Well, we would have got the revenue, we would have spent the expenditure too.
The expenditure,
Okay. So really, that if you account for that, that budget's really $3.9 million. So now it looks like we went $900,000 over. However, what we did here is when you guys went through the process to approve Hawthorne, I should have come to you and said, let's take $1 million out of the expense budget because we're not going to do this, but then let's put $1 million in the expense budget to do Hawthorne. Instead of doing that, we just used the $1 million that we already had there to do Hawthorne. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense, but I mean,
It doesn't it?
I mean, I can understand, shifting the funds, but I mean, if we were still projecting that revenue coming in and we didn't have that revenue, so really we just,
How did we have?
just burned through $1 million, right?
We were planning on spending, the Hawthorne project was in the CIP, which is basically in the reserve fund, in not the reserve funds, but the extra cash on hand. So really, I would have come to you and said, let's decrease the expenditure budget by $1 million because we're not going to do this project. And then I'm going to come back up 2 weeks later and say, I'm going to ask for a budget amendment to take $1 million from the reserves and put it back into the budget so we can do Hawthorne.
So I guess my question, John, I'm going to interrupt. My question would be, if we didn't get the $1 million revenue in, we spent $1 million on Hawthorne, did we not really take that $1 million from the reserve to begin with?
Yes.
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 Right. I mean, maybe that's what you said, but
Yes.
I just wanted to
No,
say it
you're
back
correct.
that I understood.
That's correct. Thank you.
And what we haven't resolved with Hawthorne, just to be clear, is some of it is reserved from water sewer.
We need to transfer
Some of it is general fund because we have street and stormwater improvements that come out of general fund. And then the water and sewer comes out of the utilities portion. We haven't bifurcated that portion exactly yet.
And we do still have a little payment left to make to
Right,
Hawthorne
right.
as well.
So when we were talking about the 2018 budget and we were looking at reserves, was that $1 million that was spent on Hawthorne
It was
included
basically,
in that, or was
already
it
accounted
not?
for. It was already accounted for.
Okay.
So
It was already counted as an expenditure out.
correct. So if
Okay.
we run after that conversation, if we ended, if you go to the next line, we ended the year with just under $4 million in cash in the general fund. And then these next couple lines, we've identified that per policy, we have to keep 40% of 18's budget set aside in a reserve account. So that's the 1.7 million. The general fund budget for 18 is 640,000 in the whole, and if you kind of back up and go back to our budget talk, that number was closer to 500,000 or 520,000, something like that. But then we added in 25,000 for the feasibility study, and then I came to you and asked for that amendment for us to spend a little bit of that hail damage revenue to fix the police cars. So that kind of took that back a little bit further into the hole. But we're still going to end 18 with the 1,593,000 projected, at least. That's what we're going to end, which we've always talked, or at least in the past several months, we've been talking about this 1.6 million that we think we're going to be at. It looks like we're going to come in just a touch under that. But that 1.6 million is still going to allow us to do Amory Road Bridge and at least part of the streetscape
And the transportation.
and the transportation master plan.
Those numbers are all still good.
As far as the part of the streetscape, I mean, is it still what we identified?
Yes.
That's what we're
Yeah.
still tracking for?
Right.
Okay.
That's, everything is on track for that concept. We'll be discussing priorities and stuff here in just a bit, but yeah.
So we can spend almost 1.6 million on those three things without even touching the 40% that we are supposed to keep aside.
And we don't even have to get any approvals in the budget or in the election.
Correct. That
We'll
would just
still
be a
able to do
budget amendment.
those three items, the transportation, Amory Road, and the first phase. Assuming the prices come in where we've got engineering estimates, we'll be able to do the first three of those fine. All that will work. And none of this highlighting, I want to throw this out so I can jump to it. The next second item over is transportation sales tax fund. It is not accounted for in any of the 1.6, but it can go to transportation project.
That's an additional 189,000.
So it helps cover some of the other expenditures associated with transportation master plan. That's something that could be done. Amory Road, any of that. So that money can be used on anything related to roads and bridges.
So back to Alderwoman Wilson's question and your response to it on should we budget that way, and you kind of said you'd prefer not to. Are you looking for clarification on that, so we kind of have it policy that how we'll handle that going forward, or?
I guess I didn't think of making that like a policy, but I'm thinking in my mind, the cash flow is going to work like this. We're going to go out and ask for these bonds. A bank's going to buy them, and then the bank is going to pay the construction company to actually do the work, and then we're going to make payments to the bank to repay that. So we're not going to get the $9 million from the bank and then pay the construction company. We're just making the $300,000 payment to the bank. Why this old budget had us getting the million and then paying the $1 million out, I think that was wrong. I don't think it should have been like that. So I budgeted in 18 just that $300,000 payment.
That makes sense to me. Going back to my old days, I know at the Pentagon we always budgeted for peacetime. We didn't budget for wartime. So even if we were at war, you budgeted for peacetime, and then you went supplemental to robust for it.
And I
It
think
got confusing to folks, but
right, but I
That's
think
how you have to do it.
yeah, that was
in this scenario, it allows you to separately budget, separately concept what you're doing on the over budget items. It's things that you have to do over your budget. Here's where the money's coming from. Here's how we're spending it, all that. So that's when we can do the budget adjustments after we identify the CIP stuff that we'll move forward. One other thing that Dan didn't point out in the expenditure item was 60,000 or so for the two AC units.
Yeah, 49,498 for these two. That's part of it as well. Plus 32,000 for a tornado.
So I'm going to get back on my pedestal or my podium on our shortfall that we're aware of.
Going forward or
Going forward,
Okay, yes.
based on where we are at last year, we already looked at possibly spending 30,000. To me, that probably, I don't know that was budgeted for the new website as additional cost for 2018. You just talked about the unplanned issue with air conditioning. Here is another 60,000. So when we talk about this 1.5, almost 1.6, is that theirs for streetscape? I'm saying we got to be a lot more conservative than that going forward because of things that could happen, the unexpected.
Oh, and that's what
And
the
not
reserve-
just look-
That's what the reserve fund is for.
But
In
if
the
you're
event-
required to keep 40%, to me, I don't want to dip into that 40% if we're required to keep 40%. I think you'd always have to look at, we're never going to touch that 40%.
Well,
You've got
and
this
that's the
other,
goal.
right?
And that's the goal.
So with that goal in mind, I think we have to be very cautious of how we're looking at the 1.6 is all I'm going to say.
40% is by the city ordinance.
Yes.
Right, I understand
And I
that.
agree.
We
I-
can change that if necessary.
I want to clarify that the 50,000 for these we've already spent that. That's
I
already
know,
in
but I'm just
okay.
saying an example of
Yes.
unplanned.
if we have another tornado, we have another unit go out.
Yes, you're correct.
So I just want to
But I wanted to
share that.
And maybe we can delve into it a little deeper. The 40% is not intended to be untouchable forever. It is an emergency fund. In the event we have something bad happen, let's say we have a catastrophic system failure of some kind and we lose our water treatment plant. So we're not able to sell water, but we still have people. That would be a scenario where we've got 4 months of revenue, basically.
But then it
Ish.
becomes an issue of how do you replenish that?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean,
Yes.
I mean,
So
that's,
but
I understand, I
that becomes a wartime
understand.
issue,
Okay,
as Jeff mentioned.
okay.
That becomes a wartime issue, but the purpose
Okay.
of that 40%, and I think we went into that fund with a tornado. I mean, that was an
Okay.
unforeseen
I mean,
expense.
I understand that that's what it's for.
And
but my
I'll give
concern
you,
is just,
I know, I don't disagree with you.
Okay.
They are, it's that level of where we need to go is the important thing. I will highlight to you that I think right before Wayne started as an alderman, in the utilities fund, the water side, back then we had them completely separate. We had $11,000 in its fund, which is supposed to be 40% of its budget.
okay.
So instead of having what's now in there, I think, what do you have in there? Yeah, 1.5 million, we had 11,000.
Okay.
So we were able to, through numerous decisions, and the atrazine settlement gave us 300 and some odd thousand for 3 or 4 years ago.
The same policy that talks about the 40% reserve also says that if for whatever reason we go below that 40%, we're supposed to develop a 2-year plan to get us back to the 40% level.
Okay.
But lastly, and I'll get out of the conversation, that is why it's so imperative that we have the financial policies discussions coming up over this next year. We have to set these things in place. We do not have a capital improvement policy for CIP, in part because we didn't have CIP and we didn't have enough funding to do it all. But when we get to that stage, we need to have a real clear policy on how to do those things, so that we're planning 5 years out instead of how we just spend the next 200,000.
I'm going to jump through some of these others a little quickly to get to basically one more point before we head out of here. That second fund, the special allocation fund, that's the transfer in and out to close out the 2006 TIF. That's why it started with 0. You get a revenue expense and back to 0. Jack already talked a little bit about the transportation sales tax fund, 190,000-ish available there, projected at the end of this year. And we have those 5 smaller police grants, pretty restricted on use and on revenue for that matter. And then we get to the water and sewer fund. Revenue came in higher than expected. That's 646. Part of that is a little bit of hail damage money, about $60,000 for them. And then more than $350,000 is attributable to an increase in impact fee revenue tied to higher building permits. So it appears as though our building permit projections might have been a little low last year. Okay.
Those are the kind of problems we
Yeah. But I do want to jump down to the expenses in that fund. It shows that we're just under $800,000 under budget in expenses. That's great. However, there are 4 things that we budgeted last year that we either haven't paid for or didn't do, and that would be the generator, the painting of the basins, the tower maintenance, and the pole barn. The pole barn we bid and chose not to award it. We're going to try to wrap it into the main lift station project. The tower maintenance is a 10-year agreement that it kind of happened where we just signed that agreement 2 or maybe 3 weeks ago, so none of it fell last year. It's all starting in 18 going forward. The generator and the basin painting were both RFPs that were approved. That work is being done, but we haven't expended any of that money yet. So that was budgeted last year, but we're actually going to incur the expense this year. So I'm going to come back to you and ask you for, do some quick math, about $260,000 to spend on the generator and the basin painting. That's going to come out of that $775,000 cash balance. So that cash balance is really going to look like $500,000-ish at the end of the year.
But we will have done those 2 projects.
But then those projects will be done.
One of which is this capital project.
Yeah, and very similarly here, as we pointed out, there's $1.5 million in the 40% reserve, and we have $2.2 million in the impact fee fund, which we're going to spend about $800,000 of that on the main lift station project, so that's going to go down a little bit. And then our sanitation funds after that. The only little thing I'll point out here is our expenses were a little bit higher than our revenues. This is a proprietary fund, so it should pay for itself. And I don't know if you guys recall, I know, Melissa, you asked a question about it when I brought it to you guys a long time ago, but they came, when we switched from GIMS to WCA, GIMS approached us and said, our contract says that you guys should have been paying for this bulky item pickup for the last 4 years, and they never sent us a bill. So we spent just about $36,000 on that one bill. So if you took that out of that equation, we would have been positive. We would have had more revenue than expenses in that fund too. So if you have any questions about any of this when you're reviewing it a little further, feel free to reach out to me and we'll talk about it. I'll give you some more detail if you'd like it.
I would just say I appreciate all of your explanations in detail.
Thank you.
That helps.
Thank you. Let me you want me to talk about trash rates now?
Yeah, yeah.
Our contract with WCA says that they can, or should, or can, I guess, increase their rate that they're charging us by the amount that the garbage and trash CPI index increases is.
Yeah,
Increase is.
sewer, water, and trash CPI.
Okay.
Yeah.
That CPI is 2.7%, which equates to like 47 cents. But they've come to us and said, we're only going to increase your rate 30 cents. So we are probably going to come to you guys this next board meeting in December and ask you to amend what our schedule of fees to include that 30 cents onto the residents, onto the customers.
And there won't be a request to adjust currently there's an administration fee in the budget associated with the trash fee, handling all the processing, paperwork, et cetera. With that's 3% in the bill. It represents 30, 40, 52 cents currently. There is no suggestion from a budgetary standpoint that we need to adjust that. So the rate recommendation will solely be the 30%, 30 cents, the 30 cents. With no adjustment to what we need to handle the billing. It's just what the current 5-year contract auto adjustment. These are auto adjustments based upon CPI. They don't have to get them. They ask what they ask. They can't ask more than 2.7. They're asking 2.1.
So does this mean that that we're picking up more trash than what they're anticipated? Is that what that means? That increase?
No, I think it's ultimately the cost of everything went up 2.1%, whatever. Similar to the Medicare, Medicaid costs, and those things. It's standard cost of living. Yeah. It's their COLA.
It's very similar to a COLA that is done here in the region, that we base usually our COLA increase on for our...
And the interesting thing is the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually delves deep enough into the numbers, even in a Kansas City Fed basis, deep enough to actually get these numbers and give an adjustment just for sewer, water, trash. They have it for dozens and dozens of items. Sewer, water, trash is one of them that they put in.
And that is part of our contract with WC.
Yeah.
Which is standard for waste contracts that all waste companies have in the cities.
So, as Dan indicated, he's ready to answer any questions over the next couple of weeks associated with that. Keep in mind, we're hopeful. We're not guaranteeing anything yet because this is a busy week. But we're hopeful that he will have the first priority-based budget monthly in the next meeting. A packet for you so that we can identify November and what we did there. He's working on that.
Yeah, I got the bank statements today, so as long as I can reconcile everything by Wednesday,
we'll be able to clarify that. We'll start down that priority-based budgeting review process so that we're looking at it from a programming standpoint so that everything we do is consistent. We're budgeting on priorities, we're expending on priorities, we're doing everything on those priorities. You'll understand how we're spending on those priorities as well. And that will probably dovetail fairly nicely with Alderman Blumker's request to start the departmental reviews in January. And we'll start with my department so that I can be a guinea pig for the rest of the
Are you got any questions or comments for that?
I just have a quick question. I know that we were looking with MoDOT on that intersection over there in front of Sonic. Do we have any status on that?
I can honestly tell you that one has slipped through the cracks. I will re-engage with MoDOT starting tomorrow and see where we're at. Priorities, that one got pushed down.
That limits anybody going south to Sonic. If they extend that curve, You go south to Sonic, you go into Sonic, you get something. You got to pull out and go south again till you get to 144th Street.
Well, you can go to commercial, theoretically. And that's part of the conversation that we're trying to work with
Well,
MoDOT on.
and the other is, if you extend that out, you lose access from Shannon Drive.
Shamrock, yes.
Shamrock.
Yes. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. It's similar to what happened to Meadow when they redid the highway in 99 down here. That, if you note, that extends up. So that's the conversation we'll be having with MoDOT associated with that. Exactly what they need, what they want, what they recommend. It's their highway. They have full authority to control it. So, but we can hopefully adjust some of it to make it a little safer.
My understanding is originally they had wanted to do the same thing that was done out here, and there was discussion at that point in time not to because of what Wayne had shared. But
it was a very, it was going to be a heated discussion because anytime you make it difficult for full-on traffic all the way and change traffic business, the owners get a little frustrated and obviously a little touchy. So that's where we're sitting.
I don't understand that, but we've got a lot more traffic coming through town now than we did
yes.
when that was first
Well,
put in.
my
So,
opinion is
yeah.
that after we have MoDOT review that, our top priority is not based on the profitability of an individual business, but on our public safety.
And ultimately, I think their balancing interest will be what's the cost associated with the protection grant. They're going to lean on protection, but they're not going to cut their own throats. They're short on money too.
Well, as I recall, I think we've been averaging, one accident a year? I mean, fairly serious accident a year, something like that? Is that right?
You know, off the top of your head, how many accidents we've been averaging?
As I recall, I pulled those numbers, and the last 3 years, I believe, had 4 accidents, and 3 of them were injuries, and 1 was non-injury, I think.
Okay.
That sounds familiar.
That's kind of what I remember. You know, 3 of them were fairly serious, and 1 was not so serious. And so it's a dangerous intersection. I've come close to having some accidents in this house.
And I think, as I recall, to supplement Chief's data, 3 of them had occurred in a 6-week period immediately prior to him pulling the data. One of which was that real serious one that had the lady come.
Yeah.
But there was another one 6 weeks earlier, and then the other one a year or so, 2 years prior. So, yeah, there are some serious accidents, but ultimately we will re-engage that. Just one of many things that I haven't fully engaged on.
I did have a resident come and ask me if there's a way to shorten it, which would allow for more cars to be over on that side.
Yeah.
And that would also show left turn lane going on to commercial.
That's the problem with it, and I don't know that there is a comfortable fix for anyone.
The good news is MoDOT will come with a recommendation, right?
Yep. Yes, they will. They have traffic warrants that calculate how many numbers and the distance and all that. They're still in the middle of a bargain match with the Smithville Marketplace developer on their entrance improvements that are going to be required in round 52 of back and forths. So it seems like that. I know slight exaggeration, but yes. So, sorry.
Very good.
Since you brought up the marketplace, any update on?
I haven't heard anything in the last, other than a separate engineer has inquired today, as a matter of fact, as to their individual lot requirements for stormwater. So apparently somebody's moving forward on that. I'm not far enough along that they've actually come to me and asked to have a sit down. And the developer hadn't come to me with a sit down either. But somebody's got an engineer looking at it.
Very good. We'll move on. We'll forego public comment, seeing nobody is here for that, and move on to item number 4. Streetscape Phase 2 design, walking trail design priorities.
Thank you, Mayor. I am hopeful that the packet was clear enough to understand what my current quandary is. That is, we have 2 phases that we're talking about. One is from commercial down to Liberty in the streetscape portion, and probably back in early October, late September, we cut our engineers loose to start that design. We also have from Liberty out to Smiths Fork Park entrance with the trail aspect. MoDOT's doing the bridge. We're moving forward on that aspect. That portion was added to the funding priorities for the election stuff. We pulled specifically the other portion of the streetscape off of it. So from a funding of the construction, we're going in one direction. We don't have the part that we're wanting to get funding for construction under design, and we're designing something we're not going to get funded. My recommendation is that we shut down the streetscape portion. We have access along the north side through sidewalks, and get an authorization together to do the design for the walking trail portion to go from a new Liberty intersection down to the bridge, and then start up on the other side of the bridge again and finish it up so that we can get that stuff designed. In the event we have a passage of the election, we're going to need the design to move forward, unless we're going to switch the priorities back. That's.
Do you have any idea when MoDOT will have that bridge finished over Wilkerson Creek?
I think if I remember, it's in their 2018 budget.
Their current plan is to go out to bid for their season bid March 31. So it'll be next construction season, and it's a 4 to 5 month, same kind of a concept on ours.
Okay, then where we're talking about doing the trail and holding off on streetscape from Commercial to Liberty, you're also talking about doing some ADA improvements. Will that be both from 169 to Mill and also from Commercial to Liberty? Will there be ADA?
I think it has to.
Yeah, because I know that those sidewalks are narrow, so I don't think they pass ADA. There are some ramps, but not many, and one sidewalk leads to nowhere on the south side, just down by Heritage. It just kind of dead ends.
Right.
But the sidewalks themselves are narrow, so I think we could at least do that much.
And my thought is, on the north side, we have non-ADA compliant sidewalks.
Yeah.
All the way.
Right.
My suggestion would be, similarly as to what staff's been directed to do on the west end, to do the same on the east end down to Liberty. Once you get to Liberty, that's going to have one of those four ways. Full, slow the traffic down, likely going to have to go to in this case, a three-way intersection, three-way stop. The north portion is the future entrance to the park there. It's been on the drawing board for a long time. But if we prep it then it gives you the safe crossing that we need, the pedestrian crossings. You'd have 3 of them right there, and get you over to the walking trail to take you out there.
So if someone is headed either east or west on DD, they're going to have to stop at Liberty. They're going to have a stop sign there. That'll make a lot of difference. I think that crest of that hill there.
The visibility is one of the issues. The other aspect of it is it will start the process of slowing vehicular traffic down in the concept of when we go and do the phase 2, it's going to be there anyway. The road's going to narrow. We're going to have all those other issues. Smith Street's going to have the bump. All those bump outs are in that design concept, so we need to slow the traffic down through the road narrowing, the road diet and stuff. So we'll handle it.
Well, I think with ADA compliant sidewalks along there, I think that kind of leads into the trails that would feed in. So I think that would work pretty good.
Have we decided if the trail's going to be on the north side or the south side?
It's going to be on the south side, because on the north side we are in the floodway, and it's much, much harder to get permits to construct in the floodway than it is on the south side. We can do it on the south side easily enough.
Where would be the, I mean, the objective here is to go from downtown to the park system. Yeah, so we got to cross, if we're going to go on the south side with a trail, we've got to cross that DD someplace.
Yes.
Where's it at and what's it look like?
Current discussions with both the MoDOT folks, because it's their road now, and our folks, is that at the Grace Church entrance, that would be the perfect place for a crossover. It's visible from up on the hill. The road speed is going to change when all the construction's done by MoDOT anyway, back to 35 from top of the hill by the Parks entrance or Parks Department. So it'll be 35 through there, and have some form of a signalized crossing similar to what MoDOT installed out at 169, a pedestrian activated.
Right.
Not 100% certain whether it'll be a bicycle motion activated. When you come up, it'll automatically trip, or if it's going to be you have to hit the button and go.
Okay.
But it will have to be, best case scenario, there, because then we get over and run straight into the park.
And we also, that's out of the floodway there too.
How much easement do you need to put the fill that's going to be necessary to widen that?
Not certain we're going to need much at all, because the right-of-way is fairly decent at this point from what we see.
Just right off the bridge on the south side. I mean, it just,
Oh, it's very steep, but the right-of-way itself is wider than that.
oh, the right of way is
Yeah,
wide.
the wide, right.
So
My
there's
understanding
nothing-
is MoDOT is constructing the bridge inside the existing right-of-way, and it's widening the road by a full, well, the lane widths are going to 24 versus 22 where it's at now, and they're adding an additional 8-foot walking track. So
Well,
it'll fit.
I'm just wondering about the road just north of the bridge. I mean, that thing's just, looks like it's on an old railroad right away. It's not, but it looks like it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and ultimately, those are the reasons why my suggestion would be to shut down this portion and get the other portion started. Because of those issues, that's going to have to be designed for both
I know
grading and stormwater.
the people that have come to me and asked me about all of this would much rather see the trail system go in than they would the streetscape. I'll be honest with you, most of the people that talk to me don't want that streetscape at all. But they do want that trail system.
Well, and Clayton County's plan to do work on their trail system from the eastern access going to Kearney and then going through the park. And this will then connect to their trail system, and then we want to be able to connect to Kansas City coming up from the south.
And one of the things that I was asked by several people independently was, will horses be allowed on that?
I don't know that they're restricted currently. We'd have to look at it.
Because there's
Yeah. Long term is yes, equestrian access from Kansas City all the way up.
because I didn't realize I knew so many people that rode horses
Right.
up at the lake.
Yeah.
And I just
Yeah, we might have to get separate horse and bike riding trails.
But there are plenty of amenities at the lake and specific horse trails at the lake.
Right,
Miles.
but what they were questioning was, would they be able to get from the lake
Yeah.
to town on their horse?
As long as they spend $50 while they're in town.
We'll include that in the ordinance.
So with that being said, if there are no more questions, my simple request to you all is, if there's a consensus, I will move that way and instruct our engineers to come forward with a different authorization and shut down the work on the other one. Or if you want me to bring it up for specific board vote at the meeting on Monday, we can do that, since it's a matter of directing staff.
What are we losing if we just shift the over to this new thing? I mean,
You're losing from commercial to Liberty.
no, I mean, what are we losing from like a financial, like is there any cost if we shift that?
I think what we're gonna do is take the money budgeted for doing the streetscape and flop it over into the other.
So they haven't
Sound like
spent
it's
any of
just
that money already?
reallocating it.
Right, yeah, it's a reallocation.
It may
I don't
not be
know the
exact
cost,
number. It may not be exact.
which
numbers,
is why,
but we'll
exactly.
find that out.
And they haven't really started on that other engineering anyway, right?
The other engineering associated.
The phase 2, if you will.
Yeah, they've been doing some of the groundwork. That groundwork is the survey work. That'll be good forever, unless we change something. So that works good. We'll shut that down. Here's the other aspect of it. We're getting ready to come forward with a new authorization. We're required to move the water line for the bridge. In order to do that, we're going to seriously upsize it so that we're ahead of the game on the water master plan. We'll be bringing that hopefully at the next meeting. We'll have that authorization, I don't remember, 80, whatever, for the water line redesign, and a substantial cost associated with that is going to be the survey work that we'll be able to use for this other project as well. So
I
we're
think
going
we're planning to upgrade that line from, what is it, an 8-inch to a...
No, it's currently a 12, and I think it's going to a 16 or maybe a 20. That's why we have these guys doing the plan. So
has MoDOT said anything on up at the intersection by the ballparks of making that a roundabout?
no.
I kind of mentioned that about how to cross. I know this is much cheaper to do than a roundabout would be around the corner.
At which corner are we talking about?
Up there at the dam itself.
Okay. Well, part of the bridge portion, that will become the city's intersection.
Right.
So,
Okay,
yeah, right. So at that point in time, so right now they have no plans.
Okay.
If we want to do it, we will take that portion of the road because we annexed all of the right-of-way out there in 2006, 2007, somewhere before I got here. So the right-of-way's in the city, just the property around it's not. So if that makes sense.
because I didn't know about that instead of this, but that's
Yeah.
okay.
The thought is to get it in and run it through the park. So I can move forward based upon the nodding heads that we've got.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
No disagreement? and-
Yeah.
yeah.
No serious questions associated with it. I'll move forward. I'll notify the engineering company to get us a new authorization for the other side. Okay.
Okay, let's move on to water billing payment cycle. And staff and I have had some discussions about this, and we want to talk a little bit about this, if we change our water billing payment cycle, what it will do, how challenging it may be because of the way it's structured right now. Additionally, possibly looking at some options. Currently, and I'm going to let Jack talk about this, currently I believe we have about 7 different options that people can pay for their water bill right now. And I'm going to let you discuss that, Jack.
Sure. This was brought up, and it, to be quite frank, this recurs. It's a regular recurring question. The most recent ones were related to a state law that requires entities subject to the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission to do utilities to have a 21-day billing cycle. And for point of fact, we're not subject to that jurisdiction because if we were, we wouldn't have you guys setting rates for water and sewer. We would have to go down to Jeff City to set those rates. So that's how you can visualize in your mind. We control that. We're not subject to that jurisdiction. The current payment cycle has been the same payment cycle for years. I don't know exactly how long. There used to be ordinances directly on each item. In the last several years, once we brought on Encode in 2009, Encode was simply programmed with the ordinances and all the policies that we'd had in effect into it, so that it bills on these dates and these times, and all the work that needs to occur occurs in accordance with the old rules that we've now abrogated and said simply, you got to bill everybody each month, and then when the dates are specified in the bill. So none of that's changed. Our policy has been consistent since prior to me or anybody else that is aware of the billing cycles of it when it started. So
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been paying water bill or my mother was in the same house I'm in now for almost 60 years, and it hadn't changed.
yeah, it's been the same. So with that being said, we believe it's good discussion. It's something we need to have so you guys understand where we're at, what we're doing. The intricacies of the dates, times, etc. is Dan. So I'm going to let Dan, if he has, he manages the staff that actually has to do this. He managed the discussion with his staff associated with the December, January, February sheets you see. And maybe it'd be easier to throw it out to you guys. We tried to give you the information on the constraints we're sitting on to make things happen in the way we make them happen. This was I don't even remember, to be quite frank. One of you all requested we discuss it. Here we are. We've given you the facts. If you have any questions or any specifics, Dan can answer them, and Dan can. We'll work together to answer them.
I think along with like the billing cycle, like the 21 days, the other thing that we had, and I think Wayne may have heard from the same person I did, they got charged a late fee for just being 1 day late. In looking at this, I think it's more of, you said there were 7 options for payments. I know I know Dan, where I previously worked, we discussed going to ACH. And that's something that the city would have to do probably with each of the financial institutions that offer bill pay through their service instead of checks. So are you still getting checks for bill pay?
Yes.
Would the city consider reaching out to some of the bigger banks and looking again at offering through their bill pay ACH? Because I know from the vendor standpoint, if they have a vendor, like our third party that did it, and like the vendor would be the city, how many checks are they generating going to the city on a monthly basis? Is it enough for them to reach out to you and do that process, or do you need to request through the various banks? And I think we're in an area with what happened with this constituent that may have eliminated it for, because I don't know if I'm thinking she did it through her bill pay, and it was probably a check.
It was 100% certain. It's the same group.
We've been there before.
Right here.
And I just think in today's electronic environment and paperless payments,
And
I
the
think it
question-
behooves the city
right.
to move forward
We
with
can do it.
researching
They
that.
will charge us a fee to be able to do it, and we would have to pay per institution that same fee. I don't know if it was $500-600.
Is that an annual fee?
Yes, now,
Yeah.
Is that a fee that can be added to the water bill
No.
rates?
Well,
Is that
it's
a-
going to be in the rates because it's going to be an expense.
Is that a one-time fee for setup, or is that an annual?
that was, okay, from my memory, we looked at this one time in the 13 months I've been here, and that third party was $500 a year annually for us to pay them.
Per bank.
Per bank.
Yeah, and I can't remember how many,
Yeah.
I don't know if we looked at the biggest bank that issues those checks, or if we just picked one of them.
So I know if you just started, maybe looked at
But that
that.
has the potential to be 8, 10, I mean, I have no idea how many different third parties that would be.
And that's the amount of money we're talking about. If you average how many late fees and the percentage of these late fees, in order to save that for the customer, because this is a purely customer service impact. If we're spending $8,000 a year to avoid customers having about $1,000 in late fees, that's the cost and benefit evaluation.
Well,
It being, because we'll never get, it's not that we'd ever get it back, we'd actually not be charging the $1,000, but it cost us $8,000 to not charge the $1,000.
my recommendation to her was the recommendation that we came up with last year when the board came up. We had this problem last year or the year before, and the recommendation was tell the bank that your bill date is 2 days earlier. Because the difficulty is the bank is waiting until they get a stack of checks to mail them. And if you tell them that it's due a couple of days earlier, they'll bundle it with a different bundle and mail it.
Maybe.
Different bill pay vendors do it differently. Some have you, the minute you request the payment, they will debit your account then.
Well, here's what I
Other
can tell
bill
you.
pay vendors, if
The
I'm
last
saying I want it the
packet checks we
15th,
got.
you'll get it the 15th, and I will be debited the 15th. So,
the last pack of checks we got, because this is the scenario when we get the checks, came from probably 9 or 10 different banks. We received it on the 20th of the month with checks dated anywhere from the 14th to the 22nd. 6 of them were post-dated, and then the remainder, all of which arrived 3 days after the late fees had triggered, came in then. So it didn't matter that they posted it on the 14th, because their check actually had 14th. But they didn't even mail it until the 18th, which was the day after the late fees triggered.
I know.
And then it got to us.
I know some of the bill pay vendors, they recommend if you know it's going to go by check, that you have to submit it at least a week ahead of time and request payment a week ahead of time.
And
in order
that's
to possibly get
usually-
it
right.
on time.
Because we do get multiple packets during the 2, 3 packets, sometimes 4. And that's the scenario is when you're signing up on your online bill pay through your account, you can determine real quickly whether it's going to be a hard check or if it's an ACH. And that is, if it's paying the next day, it's ACH, and if it's going to be more than one day, it's a hard check.
Well, there's got to be a little bit of labor saving to the city, I think, between ACH and a check, because the checks mean you're going to have to process them, you're going to have to deposit them, whereas the ACH is just going to be an automatic. So there is a cost to that, but it might be somewhat of an offset.
Yeah, there might be a touch of savings because really the only extra step with a check is you run it through the scanner to send it to the bank and make sure that balance.
Yeah, we deposit from front desk.
Is it possible for like credit card companies where you can go into their sites and say, okay, I want to make a payment and let them create the debit to debit the account, separate from us signing up for auto debit of the city on the website, being able to, customer wants to sign in on the 14th, I want to pay my bill, I'm setting here, they give you all the information to create the ACH debit, separate from what we currently do of me signing up and giving you an authorization, kind of the back window.
We can do a credit card payment online.
I'm talking about out of your checking account. Though I want you to debit my checking account, just like I do for the ACH.
Well, are you asking if we do that, if we allow them to do that like as a
one-time payment?
Not that I know of.
I don't know if there's any software that could maybe go that route. I was thinking that too.
Well, and here's what I will tell you, personal experience. U.S. Bank customer myself, have the debit credit card deal. If I use it to make a payment just like that, it comes out immediately. It's processed as an ACH.
It is.
Online. So if I paid a water bill here for the city of Smithville, I'd go on, log in, find out what my bill is, make my payment, and it would occur immediately. Now, the reason some folks don't like that is our fees associated with it. And we have other vendors that allow us to do it, and there are transaction fees and our fees associated with it. So there are some options that we can consider. I mean, like Mayor started off, we have 7 options available for our customers now. Some of this stuff we can address, but it would be best addressed when we're actually looking at doing a water rate adjustment so that we can account for these, because all this will cost extra money. We just need to figure out how to adjust the rates. And we're not talking a huge adjustment in rates, I wouldn't think, to allow this to happen. It's just mean the rates are going to go up to incorporate.
Does the city promote people signing up to allow the city to auto debit?
That's the first thing anytime we get any kind of, I'm going to say complaint, but I don't know if that's the right word, about this, that's the
Because
first
they're
thing.
debited on the 15th, so to me that's
And if
that's
you
the
sign
most
up-
cost-effective way to do it.
Right.
But-
This particular customer absolutely refuses to let somebody from an outside party have access to their account.
Yeah, I've heard of that before
Yeah.
too. And
And yet the same customer
That's
doesn't
what-
want to pay till after the 17th of the month.
But isn't all that information's on the checks as well when it comes through? So I mean,
Well, but
either
if
way,
they're-
they're going to have access. Someone can get access
Well-
if they really wanted to.
It's the direct
But-
deposit in nature is what they're concerned with. That we send a bill, they don't, and on the 13th of the month, if it's coming out on the 15th, we have to send it 2 full business days in advance. So we send
we send the
give us
file on the 13th.
give us $200 out of your account. And it happens, no matter what. Now, the counter to that is you get a bill in the mail that says, here's what we're going to do, and it's coming out of your account on the 15th. So we give them that information, but there are privacy issues associated with people not wanting anyone to have access, and that's why we give them 6 other ways to pay.
But he's right, people can. And I've known people that have had this happen to them, that they got a check for something else, used the numbers off the check, and photocopied a signature from another author, from another paper, put that all together in a document, sent it to the bank, had access to their account. Off the check, so.
And ultimately, if we're talking about security, that's one thing. The other aspect, I apologize for that, but I think we need to really get to the issue is, all of these things are customer service related. We're talking about a very small group. We can make an adjustment. It will likely be added cost to the bottom line that we would best handle during a rate hearing. We haven't proposed any rate adjustment requests. I think it's been 2 years. We did sewer in 2013 and water in 2014.
I think
To kind of say something that goes with the last 2 things that you guys have said, the payment method that saves us the most time and is easiest for us is that auto debit on the 15th. The system generates the file, we send it to the bank, they go in and pull it.
I never thought frolicking on the beach in Jamaica and the bill comes due,
Don't worry
it gets
about it.
paid whether
You
I
click a button and it posts all those payments.
Right.
That's the ideal way.
Yes. You can frolic all you like there.
what percentage, maybe you can bring this when we have the discussion. I was
I
going
know
to
what
say
you're
the
asking
percentage
about.
of checks versus ACH on
I
your
can
water
find out.
customers.
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
The ACH has plummeted since the vendor switch. For example, your former Platte Valley used a different vendor. Always had ACH. They swapped vendors. Boom. That's when the complaints started, to be quite frank. When that vendor started, whoever that vendor is. When that new vendor came in, they had a different threshold, and as soon as that new threshold came in, everybody's payments started coming late. Now, the other aspect of it is when this happens, and it doesn't happen to everyone every month, when it happens, one call to their bank generates one call to us from the bank. Is it in fact that? Yes, here it is. These are the amounts, and they refund the money back to the customer's account. We're not aware of any time the bank has not done that.
I wondered about that too. But then I'm wondering, the one maybe where you're getting the complaints from the late payments, if it is, we just mentioned, maybe that's one that we do look at biting the $500 a month or a year to provide that service just from that one financial
So
institution.
we're going to spend $500 a year just for.
But if what I'm saying, how many individuals is that impacted by that financial, is what I was getting at. If it's just one, no, but.
No, and I don't think it's one, but there are 2 aspects of it. Some people know it happens and are, dadgummit, I got to figure out a better way, and never do, and they get charged late fees and they move on. Other folks are a little more frugal with their purse strings, and it goes from a 2 on this person's scale of frustration to a 12. And when that happens, we don't have the ability on our system to find those numbers. But I can tell you, in my last couple of years of being officed up here instead of in the back, it happens probably twice a month, sometimes from the same customers. So the level comes in at the real high.
The difficult with handling it with each bank is every time you get somebody new moves in, they might not change their bank. You might have somebody move into town, have a problem with it. They got a bank out in Lenexa. Then another guy moves in, he's got a bank out in Grandview. Another guy moves
Or
in.
West Virginia.
And I guess,
West Virginia.
and I guess that's my concern. Are we going to spend another $500 every time we get a customer?
I think the best thing for us to do is to get a list of as best we can, and it may require us to do some extra work on evaluating the checks as they come in. Which banks are paying them, so that we know. I know on the last one there were at least 8 different institutions.
Yeah, so it could start adding up the money.
Right.
Right. So I think it becomes a cost benefit. You guys need to know what the cost is, and we'll get you as good as we can to the benefit, what the benefit is.
But then,
So
like
that
you just said, financial institution change their bill pay vendors, and you're into a whole different scenario again, so.
Yes.
So it may look like the options we have are the best options to go with, which is,
My solution to this problem right now is to call the customer back and ask her to submit a check a week early to the bank, which is what we did
Yeah.
years ago.
And to be quite frank, what is likely going to happen for somebody if they're on a tight budget, they're going to submit it a week early, expecting it to actually come in late, and it'll hit on the first day every time, and put you in the budget. That's what happens.
Well, and that's the point, because it puts it in a different mailing cycle from the bank.
Yep.
And that's the whole point about putting it in early, get it in a different mailing cycle.
And sometimes it's the holiday, if there's a holiday in there.
Yeah, it depends when they're requesting it, when the weekend falls and all that stuff.
auto debit.
Any other discussion or questions or anything relative to the water bill and payment cycle?
Well, I say one more solution is we can convert everything to Bitcoin and take payments that way.
You're out, Bart.
0% of people pay via Bitcoin.
Yeah, that we know. Nobody paid.
I can't even afford one Bitcoin.
I was gonna say, but it's going up.
So
They're talking to the next
$4
one.
million.
I know.
What, car drive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're done with item 5. I would entertain a motion to adjourn for 5 minutes, just to take a quick break.
I move we adjourn for 5 minutes.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We'll be adjourned for 5 minutes.
All those opposed?
Linda, do you want me to pause
All
this?
those opposed, say no.
No.
Motion carries.
What did I do?
Linda, should I pause this?
Yes.